Chapter 651. Jessie, you can ask for my help if you can't reach it, Ethan said in a doting tone. Grinning at him, Jessie replied, I wanted to take some for Tim. Thank you, Mr. Frank. Then, she passed it to Tim. Tim turned to her and said gently, Thank you, Jessie. You're welcome. You should eat more, Tim. Sure. Everyone beamed when they saw how well the 6 children got along. The sight of the 6 cute kids sitting together was too adorable for words. After lunch, Orissa brought Mary to the latter's room to rest. The children tagged along and helped to make the bed. All right, you should go and rest too, Mary urged after lying down on the bed. Orissa pulled the covers over the older woman and led the children out of the room. Come on, sweethearts, let's go upstairs and rest. Tim glanced at her. He wanted to stay with Mary. Miss York, can I sleep here with great-grandaunt? Crouching down next to him, Orissa said gently, she needs to rest. If you're here, she won't be able to sleep well. That's right, Tim, you'll distract her if you stay. Come and sleep with us upstairs. You haven't explored the rooms upstairs yet. Jessie persuaded, tugging at Tim's hand. Pulling at Tim's other hand, Gavin added, yes, let's go upstairs. The help will be here to take care of great-grandaunt, so don't worry. Just then, Edwin walked over with a housekeeper. You don't have to worry, Miss York. I've asked someone to keep watch at the door and attend to Madame Mary if she needs anything. Orissa nodded. Tim, let's go upstairs and rest. Is that okay? She asked, wanting to hear what he thought. Tim bit his lip. He wanted to go upstairs, but he was also worried about Mary. Perhaps it was because he was in an unfamiliar place and was still not used to it. Sighing, Orissa caressed his head and led him into the room. In that case, why don't you sleep here with your great-grandaunt first, okay? Thank you, Miss York. He answered, looking up at her. Smiling at him tenderly while patting his head fondly, she responded, You're welcome. What's the matter? Hearing their voices, Mary raised herself slightly while in bed and looked down. Tim wants to sleep here with you. He's probably still not used to it, Orissa said with a smile. Mary broke into a grin and motioned for Tim to climb onto the bed. Come on over, Tim. Sleep next to me. Nodding, Tim hurried over at once. Gavin and the other kids exchanged glances, then ran over as well. Great-grandaunt, can we sleep with you too? Taken aback, Mary turned toward Orissa. Gazing at the 5 children and thinking that it would be better for them to accompany Tim, Orissa did not object. You can stay, but remember not to disturb great-grandaunt while she's resting. The children nodded. Get into bed quickly and get some rest, Orissa urged, a smile tugging at her lips. The 5 children climbed onto the bed and lay next to Tim. After tucking them in, Orissa waited for a while before leaving the room. When Benjamin came out of the study and saw no sign of the children, he asked, Where are the kids? They're inside Grandaunt's room. They wanted to sleep with her, Orissa answered. His eyes flicked toward the room. Glancing at him, she continued, It was Tim who wanted to sleep with her, then Gavin and the others clamored to stay too. Benjamin murmured an acknowledgement, then said to the housekeeper, Take good care of them. Yes, Mr. Graham. Turning to Sean, he asked, Do you need to check on Grandaunt now? That's all right. I'll check on her after she wakes up and administers a shot. Benjamin nodded, then grabbed Orissa's hand. Let's go upstairs and rest. Kingsley, Sean, and Ethan widened their eyes, their curiosity piqued. Orissa nodded at the trio and followed Benjamin. Upstairs, her cheeks flushed scarlet. Once they were upstairs, she freed her hand from his and said stiffly, Good afternoon, Graham. With that, she turned and went to the kids' room. Benjamin stared at her coldly as she walked away, then strode forward and followed her. Chapter 652. What are you doing here? Orissa was surprised to see him around. She turned around and looked at him. I want to unpack my luggage. Give yourself a break. Go and take a rest. Benjamin said in a deep voice. Orissa glanced at him. I'm not tired. It won't take long anyway. Benjamin shot a glance at her before leaving. After watching him leave, she continued unpacking the children's luggage. The sextuplets, items had taken up the space of 2 adult suitcases, even though each child might not have a lot of things to bring along. Meanwhile, Benjamin returned to the master bedroom and noticed his suitcase was lying next to hers. He then turned around and started hanging Arissa's clothes piece by piece and arranged them nicely in the wardrobe. He stored her brasiers and panties in the drawers. After tidying up Arissa's clothes in the wardrobes, he looked at them and knitted his brows. Benjamin turned around and unlocked his suitcase. He took out his clothes and hung them in between Arissa's. He was delighted to see their clothes arranged alternately in the wardrobe. Arissa, who had just stepped out of the children's room, bumped into him when he came out of the master bedroom. Benjamin cast a brief look at her. "Go and take a rest. I'll be in the study." Arissa froze for a bit. "Aren't you going to take a rest?" Benjamin stopped walking. He tilted his head and gazed into her eyes. "Do you want me to accompany you?" Arissa's lips twitched. "That's just a casual question. What makes you think I need your company?" "No." She turned around and went to the guest room but did not find her suitcase. Something seemed to have popped up in her mind, and she went straight to Benjamin's room. She was bewildered when she saw her clothes being hung side by side with his in the wardrobe. Awkwardness was written all over her face when she opened the drawers and saw all her undergarments and sanitary pads. Who did this? Edwin. Or Benjamin? Please don't tell me it's Benjamin. Her cheeks remained brick red for a moment. Why are you standing there? Shouldn't you go to bed? Arissa was startled by a deep voice that emerged from her back. She quickly slid the drawer in and glared at the man. I didn't do this. Benjamin stared at her. I know. Arissa widened her eyes and blinked. He knows. The uncomfortable look on the man's face left her even more flabbergasted. He did it, didn't he? Benjamin frowned when he saw how perplexed she looked. Frustration kicked in, and Benjamin said in a deep voice, "Stop standing there like a dummy. Come down with me to go through the documents if you're not sleepy." Arissa nodded. I'm sleepy. She then left in haste. Where are you going? Come back and sleep here. Benjamin ordered. Arissa shot him a glare. Are you sure? Benjamin inched closer, forcing her to take a few steps back. She eventually tripped and fell onto the bed. Benjamin leaned forward and caged her with his arms. Arissa's heart started racing. The man looked into her eyes and said in an authoritative voice, "We've just welcomed him back to our family. Do you want him to find out his mommy is not on good terms with his daddy?" Arissa gaped and said, "We were never close in the first place." A hard glint flashed across Benjamin's narrowed eyes. "Do you want him to know that we have an unusual relationship?" The man's words rendered Arissa speechless. What unusual relationship? He's my boss, and I work for him. That's all. But she no longer dared question him upon seeing the sharp, intimidating gaze in his eyes. What should we do then? She asked him directly. Benjamin arched his brow. From now on, you'll have to sleep in this room. Arissa swallowed the fluid lodged in her throat and sniggered. You want me to pretend to be your wife? Mr. Graham? Chapter 653. Arissa stared intently at Benjamin. Everyone knows our relationship. I'm sure our babies know what's going on between us. Why do we have to pretend to be a married couple? Dad is very particularly concerned about our relationship. If you want to live with the kids, you must cooperate with me and pretend to be my girlfriend. Benjamin reminded. Girlfriend, not wife. A hint of disappointment flashed across Amelia's eyes, but she soon pulled herself together. Her eyes swept from left to right for a moment, and she nodded. All right. Is he trying to get closer to me since he seems to have developed a better impression of me now? If that's the case, why should I turn him down? I must seize the opportunity and not let him go. Benjamin began to frown when he saw her smirking but had no idea what she had in mind. Upon noticing the brooding expression on his face, Arissa froze for a moment. You look unhappy, Mr. Graham. The man gave her the side eye but did not know what else to say. But he believed she must have kept a few tricks up her sleeve. Don't try to play mind games with me. Arissa did not understand a word he uttered. What on earth is he talking about? She poked Benjamin's chest and snorted. You wanted me to pretend to be your girlfriend, and I agreed. Yet, you're giving me this look. What's wrong with you? This man is so hard to please. Do you realize I'm the one who got the short end of the stick? Orissa exclaimed. Benjamin narrowed his beady eyes and locked his gaze on her. What do you mean? I'm a woman. What if the whole world finds out about my relationship with you? I don't think any man would dare to marry me in the future. Orissa rolled her eyes at him. Irritation surged up inside Benjamin, and his expression darkened. He then let out a loud snort. Orissa gave him a puzzled look as she did not understand why he reacted that way. The way Benjamin scowled at her sent a chill down her spine. All of a sudden, Benjamin leaned over and locked lips with her. It was as if the domineering man was trying to suck the air out of her mouth. Orissa was taken aback by his move. She kept tapping his back and tried to pull herself away, but her resistance was futile. Her mind went totally blank as the kiss grew more intense. Benjamin even bit her on the lower lip. She glowered at the man with bloodshot and teary eyes. You crazy. Before she could cuss, Benjamin continued sticking his tongue into her mouth as if he was punishing her. Orissa's mouth was all numb and swollen. The passionate kiss caused her head to spin and nearly suffocated her. Benjamin finally let go of her just before she ran out of breath. Benjamin was still huffing in anger. He shot her a glare and stormed out of the room. Orissa lay on bed and gasped for air. Her whole face was flushed. What AB****? How dare he bite me? She touched her lower lip and realized it was bleeding. Orissa was hopping mad and embarrassed at the same time. Has he gone mad? Why did he vent his frustration on me? She recalled the remarks she made earlier and instantly became thunderstruck. Did he get mad because I mentioned something about marrying another man? A warm feeling welled up in her heart. Crazy man. She grabbed a pillow and punched at it repeatedly. Why must he bite me when he's angry? Orissa cursed him in her heart and eventually fell into a deep slumber. When Benjamin returned to the room and saw her hugging his pillow, his eyes darkened. He walked to the bed, sat by the edge, and covered her with a blanket. Orissa turned over and continued sleeping. Benjamin brushed his fingers over her lower lip and noticed it was wounded. He could not help but knit his brows. I've let my emotions get the better of me. He could not control himself when she said she wanted to get another man to be her husband. Benjamin went out to retrieve the first aid kit. He then cleaned the lower lip and applied ointment to the wound. Once he was done, he left the room with the first aid kit. As he walked past the guest room, Benjamin asked the housekeeper, "Are they asleep?" "Yes, Mr. Graham." Benjamin nodded and headed to his study. Chapter 654. It was almost nightfall when Orissa regained consciousness. What is going on? She lay in bed for a long while before she registered her surroundings. Orissa reached out for her phone to check the time. She widened her eyes in shock when she saw it was almost 6 in the evening. I was asleep for that long. She had slept for 4 hours as she fell asleep at 1 just now. Orissa quickly scrambled to her feet, freshened up, and changed into a fresh set of clothes before heading downstairs. She headed straight for Mary's room. However, Mary and the kids were not in the room. They're not in the living room either. Where are they? Miss York, you're awake. Edwin greeted warmly when he saw her. Orissa smiled when she saw that it was Edwin. Edwin, where is Grandaunt and the kids? Could they have gone out? Gavin took Madame Mary and everyone else out for a walk in the garden. Edwin replied with a smile. Orissa nodded. I'll go get them, Miss York. It's almost time for dinner. Can you go get Mr. Graham? Edwin then turned around and left to get Mary and the kids. Orissa felt a little embarrassed as all she did that day was eat and sleep. She directed her gaze toward the study and decided against calling Benjamin for dinner as she recalled what he did before she fell asleep. Orissa turned around and followed Edwin out the door. She caught sight of Mary and the 6 kids by the lake, surrounded by plenty of housekeepers and bodyguards. No wonder there isn't a single soul in the house. Orissa smiled and made her way over. Mommy, Mommy's awake. Oliver and Jesse squealed in delight when they saw Orissa. With that, the kids, including Tim, rushed toward her. Mommy, Miss York. Hey, Orissa greeted them with an affectionate smile. She pulled Gavin, Zachary, Oliver, Jasper, and Jesse into her arms as Tim stood by and watched bashfully. Come here, sweetheart. Orissa waved him over with a smile. Tim gave her a look before inching over. Orissa hugged all 6 of them, feeling satisfied. Sweethearts, when did you get up? Mommy, we woke up at around 3. Jessie smiled. Mommy overslept. Orissa smiled awkwardly. She checked out the kids and noticed that everyone was drenched in sweat. Mommy, you're such a lazy pig for sleeping that long. Jasper teased. Orissa pinched his nose. If I'm a lazy pig, then what are you? He's a lazy piglet. Oliver chuckled. If I'm a lazy piglet, then you are a lazy piglet too. Jasper harumphed and shot back. The housekeepers and bodyguards broke out in laughter as they watched on. Edwin and Mary were also watching them interact with a smile on their faces. Mommy, why did you sleep for so long? Are you sick? Zachary placed his palm on Orissa's forehead worriedly. Orissa pulled his hand away, feeling pleased. I'm fine. I fell into a deep sleep because it was too comfortable. Tim blinked as he observed Orissa to make sure she was okay. Mommy, were you not able to sleep well for the past few days? Gavin had hit the nail on the head. Orissa smiled and rubbed their heads. What games are you playing? We took great-grandaunt and Tim out for a walk in the garden. Jasper chuckled. Orissa nodded. Are you done? She turned to check on Mary and felt relieved to see her in high spirits. No, Gavin smiled. They still had some way to go. Then let's continue after dinner. Orissa walked over to Mary's side, squatted down by her wheelchair, and placed a hand on her knee affectionately. Grandaunt, how was your nap? Mary nodded. It was okay. She smiled. She just found the mattress a little too soft for her liking. Chapter 655. Orissa scrutinized her face as she asked, how's the mattress? Is it comfortable? We can get you another one if you don't like it. Do we have hard mattresses here? It's too soft, Mary said awkwardly. Orissa smiled and nodded. She turned to Edwin and said, Edwin, can you replace Grandaunt's mattress with a harder one? She's used to hard mattresses, so it's better to get her one to help with her sleep. Of course, we do have hard mattresses. Edwin then instructed the housekeepers to replace Mary's mattress. Is it too much trouble? Mary asked apologetically. No, Edwin smiled. Anything is fine as long as you are well rested, Madam Mary. Don't be shy. I'm sure Mr. Graham wants you to live comfortably. That's why he brought you here. Mr. Graham has never brought anyone home before this. But he has changed a lot ever since Miss York moved in. He can even accept living with strangers now. We look to be about the same age. Please just call me Mary. Mary felt a little shy. Edwin gave it some thought and nodded in agreement. How about I call you Miss Connor instead? Mary thought this sounded better than Madam Mary, but it didn't make much of a difference. Orissa smiled. I think it's fine. Edwin will call you Miss Connor, and you will call him Edwin. How nice. Mary and Edwin smiled. They decided they would refer to each other that way from here on out. Grandaunt, let's get dinner. Orissa got up and wheeled Mary into the house. Sweethearts, let's go. We can come for a walk again after dinner. Okay, the kids replied sweetly as they followed close behind. Orissa couldn't stop smiling as she looked at them. Tim, do you like it here? Tim glanced at Orissa and nodded. This place is so big. Orissa smiled. It is. I had some trouble getting used to this place when I first arrived. I even got lost along the way. When did you lose your way, Mommy? Gavin asked out of curiosity. Orissa laughed awkwardly. When I first arrived, I got lost in the garden. Back quote. Gavin smiled. Can you find your way around now, Mommy? No, she has no sense of direction. Zachary giggled and told him Orissa's secret. Orissa blushed upon his words. I got lost because I wasn't familiar with the place. She tried to save her dignity. Edwin and Mary laughed as they found their conversation to be very amusing. Miss York, I'm not very good at finding my direction in an unfamiliar place either. You'll be fine once you get used to this place. Tim comforted. Orissa stared at his grim expression and nodded. Yes, sweetheart, did you sleep well? Tim nodded. Mommy, Tim woke up later than all of us. He slept like a baby. Oliver reported. Orissa felt relieved upon his words. Tim, our home is your home. Please make yourself at ease, she assured. Tim nodded. Okay. Orissa smiled in response and said sweetly, "Sweethearts, go get Daddy for dinner." Edwin smiled and gave her a look. Miss York does care a lot for Mr. Graham. Mommy, you should hurry up too. Gavin reminded before he joined his siblings to call for Benjamin. Okay, slow down. Watch your step, Orissa urged when she saw the kids running into the house. She kept her eyes peeled on the kids, worried that they would trip and fall. The kids ran over to Benjamin's study with Gavin at the forefront. He stopped at the door as Tim, Zachary, Oliver, Jasper, and Jesse stood side by side behind him. Gavin gave them a look. Let's do it together. All 5 of them nodded in agreement. Daddy, Mr. Graham, it's time for dinner. All 6 of them shouted in unison. Chapter 656. Gavin looked at Tim with a smile and said, Tim, if you address him as Daddy, Daddy is going to be so happy. Zachary frowned and protested, No. You can't call him Daddy. The rest of the kids looked at him in bewilderment. Zachary's eyes gleamed as he said to Tim, Tim, you have to call Mommy first. Since Mr. Graham hasn't passed the test yet, you should refrain from calling him Daddy. Tim merely stared at them, not knowing who to listen to. Right then, Benjamin came out. As his gaze swept across the children, it finally landed on Zachary. With a teasing look in his eyes, he asked, Zachary, did you just call me Daddy? Zachary was stunned momentarily and started blushing. He then instantly retorted, No, I didn't call you Daddy. Benjamin smiled and stared at him intently. Didn't you just call me Daddy again? Zachary went silent upon hearing that. Speechless, Gavin also glanced at Benjamin and said, Daddy, do you have no shame? Benjamin's eyes flickered, and he glared at his son. Seeing that, Gavin flinched and addressed his siblings, Let's go wash our hands before our dinner. Mommy is here. Jessie was over the moon when she saw Orissa and Mary come in. Upon hearing that, all the kids quickly went to wash their hands. Orissa saw Benjamin standing by the entrance of the study room, but she shifted her gaze away. Instead, she just pushed Mary right past him. Benjamin merely glanced at her in response. It's time to eat, Mr. Graham. Mary called out. Benjamin nodded. Grandaunt, you can just call me Benjamin. Mary smiled and nodded. Benjamin followed them from behind to wash his hands as well. Sensing the man's gaze on her, Orissa turned her head back to look. However, she quickly turned back around again after she saw Benjamin talking to Edwin. Was I imagining things? She pushed Mary to the bathroom after that. Jessie was just done washing her hands, so she came out and said, Mommy, I'm done. Good. Head over to the dining room first. Orissa replied with a smile. After Mary was done using the bathroom, Orissa washed her hands for her before pushing her out. Please let me help, Miss York. Edwin came over to push Mary to the dining room. Orissa went back to the bathroom to relieve herself before washing her hands. After that, she went to the dining room. By then, the kids were all already seated. Mommy, hurry up, they urged her excitedly when they saw her. After giving them a nod, Orissa was stunned when she noticed Sean and Kingsley there. Let's eat, Mrs. Graham. Kingsley greeted with a smile. Orissa nodded awkwardly. I thought you guys had already left. No, we were upstairs, and we've just woken up. Kingsley smiled and answered. Benjamin came over and frowned when he saw Kingsley looking at Orissa. Zip it before I throw you out. Kingsley was shocked when he noticed Benjamin's warning gaze. He then looked away and teased softly, Benjamin, why are you so petty? Can't I chat with Mrs. Graham? Benjamin shot him a fierce stare and uttered, Edwin, get him out. Edwin glanced at them and had no choice but to approach Kingsley. However, Kingsley remained seated. Edwin, do you have to be so obedient and listen to everything he says? At least wait till I'm done eating, okay. I'm famished. Benjamin shot him another glare. Upon seeing that, Kingsley quickly shut his mouth after saying, fine. I'll keep my mouth shut. Orissa was amused by their interaction. Shall we eat? The kids are hungry, she asked Benjamin softly. Something flickered in Benjamin's eyes as he gazed at her. Let's eat. Orissa smiled and said to everybody, dig in, everyone. She then got some food for Mary and the kids before she started eating. The moment the hot food came into contact with the corner of her lips, she gasped in pain. Benjamin's eyes flashed, and he stared at the corner of her lips for a while. Jessie, who was sitting beside Arissa, heard it. She then tilted her head and asked, "Mommy, what's wrong?" Chapter 657. All at once, the people sitting opposite Arissa raised their heads to look at her. Arissa smiled awkwardly and pursed her lips before comforting Jessie, "It's nothing. Hurry up and dig in." In the meantime, the other 5 kids were all staring at her too. Tim then noticed something on the corner of Arissa's lips. "Miss York, what's wrong with your lips?" Tim touched his own lips to show her what he meant. Upon hearing that, Kingsley, Sean, Mary, and even Edwin were staring at the corner of her lips. Arissa was embarrassed when she saw them looking at her. Kingsley and Sean seemed to have thought of something after seeing the marks on her lips, and they smiled ambiguously. All the while, they kept glancing between Benjamin and Arissa. Kingsley then teased her, "Mrs. Graham, what happened to your lips?" Arissa avoided his gaze and uttered, "Perhaps I'm falling ill." "That doesn't seem to be the case. I think they were bitten." Sean chimed in. Indeed, she couldn't hide it from Sean because he was a doctor. Arissa was rendered speechless. Benjamin, on the other hand, glared at them ferociously. "Leave now if you guys aren't going to eat." Kingsley and Sean looked at him before exchanging glances with each other. They both smiled at each other after realizing that they had the same idea in their heads. Now we know why Benjamin looks so unsatisfied and moody. After that, they both smiled sheepishly and kept silent. Arissa just kept eating with her head hung low. At that moment, she was blushing because she could sense everyone looking at her. Benjamin's eyes glinted when he saw her blushing. "Eat more." He took some food for her. Arissa rolled her eyes and glanced at him from the corner of her eyes. He was staring intently at her, not appearing the slightest bit apologetic at all. "He's crazy." Arissa cursed inwardly before going back to her meal. She picked up the food he had given to her and chewed aggressively to vent her anger. Benjamin couldn't help but smile imperceptibly when he saw how grumpy she looked. Suddenly, there was a commotion at the front door. Benjamin furrowed his brows when he heard that. It was Jack who had just arrived. "Mr. Graham, you guys are back." Jack had always been an easygoing and clumsy guy, so he just walked right in with a smile on his face. When his gaze landed on the 6 children, he greeted, "Hi, everyone. We meet again." The kids all turned to look at him. Gavin uttered coolly, "Mr. Jack, you're just in time." Jack chuckled and wanted to touzle the boy's hair. However, Gavin quickly dodged and stared at his hand in disgust. Jack retracted his hand sheepishly and patted Tim instead. "Hi, Danny. His name is Tim." Benjamin's expression turned solemn as he glared at Jack. Jack gazed at Benjamin and quickly rectified, "Oh. Hi, Tim." "Hi, Mr. Jack." Tim greeted obediently. "You're such a good boy." Jack casually pinched Tim's cheek. Upon feeling an angry gaze fixed on him, Jack sneaked a peek at Benjamin before retracting his hand. "Jack, you might have lost your hand if you were to pinch just a second longer," Kingsley teased. Upon hearing that, Sean laughed at Jack. "Tim is too cute. I can't help it." Jack chortled. Jasper and Jessie laughed out loud, amused by the scene. Gavin then rubbed Tim's cheek and advised in a serious tone, "Tim, don't let anyone pinch your cheeks anymore. Otherwise, they might go out of shape." Upon hearing those words, everyone laughed. Jack ran his hand over his nose awkwardly because he had just been dissed, and by a child, no less. Arissa chuckled because she knew how much Jack liked the kids. When she noticed he was embarrassed, she uttered, "Jack, have you eaten? Would you like to join us?" "Sure, Mrs. Graham." Jack was elated and went on to pull a chair out for himself. "Did I say you can sit? Wait outside?" Benjamin scolded in a deep voice. Jack immediately froze, not daring to sit down. In fact, he looked rather pitiful. Arissa frowned and shot Benjamin a glance before standing up for Jack. "What's with your temper? Jack means no harm." Chapter 658. Jack was touched. He looked at Arissa and said, "You're so nice, Mrs. Graham." Arissa blushed when she heard those words. Benjamin stared at her and snorted softly. You're quite adept at standing up for others, aren't you? Arissa's eyes flickered, and she ignored Benjamin's sarcastic tone. He was just messing around with the kids. No. You're wrong for throwing a tantrum. Jack became worried for Arissa when he saw Benjamin's warning look. Sit down, Jack, Edwin uttered. Mr. Graham is only going to get even more pissed if Jack keeps standing there. Benjamin turned toward Edwin and stared at him intently. You're not getting paid this month. Yes, sir. Edwin retreated to the side and kept silent. Arissa was frustrated by Benjamin's domineering attitude. Although most of the people there were aware of Benjamin's temper, Mary and Tim weren't. That was why they felt uneasy when they saw Benjamin throwing a tantrum. Instantly, the mood in the dining room became awkward. When Arissa saw how uncomfortable Mary looked, she reached out her hand to tug at Benjamin's pants under the table before shooting him a pointed look. She then reminded him softly, "Don't throw a tantrum when everyone's eating. Do you see that? They're now too scared to eat." Benjamin glanced at her and saw how passive and coquettish she looked. When he eventually saw her hand on his pants, his mood lightened up almost instantly. "Please carry on, Grandaunt," Benjamin uttered respectfully and shot Edwin a look, hinting him to get food for Mary. "Okay, you too." Mary nodded and said nothing more. Benjamin then glanced at Tim. "Tim, just take whatever you want to eat, okay? If you can't reach them, get the others to help you." "Thank you, Mr. Graham," Tim answered politely. After that, Benjamin's gaze shifted toward Jack. Arissa was afraid that the tension would rise again, so she quickly coaxed, "Benjamin, let Jack join us, okay? We have plenty of food." She even placed some of his favorite food on his plate as she spoke. Benjamin snorted lightly and ordered, "Sit down, then." Jack was extremely grateful. "Thank you, Mr. Graham. Thank you, Mrs. Graham." Arissa smiled awkwardly and answered, "You're welcome. Also, you can just address me as Hey." Benjamin voiced his displeasure. Arissa turned to look at him. "Did you forget what you've promised me?" Benjamin asked. Reminded of her promise, Arissa cleared her throat and turned away. "Don't be shy, okay? Eat up, everyone," she said. Edwin didn't feel a hint of uneasiness when he saw Arissa acting like the lady of the house. Instead, he was rather pleased. Kingsley and Sean smiled faintly when they sneaked a peek at Benjamin, who was sitting in the main seat at the head of the dining table. There's no doubt that Benjamin does treat Arissa differently. Jack merely kept quiet as he smiled at the 6 kids. The kids were all busy gobbling up the food served to them. When they finished the food on their plates, Jack and the others would fill it up again. Arissa was pleased when she saw the men caring for the kids, so she smiled and focused on filling up her own stomach. However, she could only eat slowly because her lips were causing her pain. Benjamin noticed it, so he turned toward her and asked, "Are the dishes not to your liking?" Arissa shot him a look and answered, "That's not it." "Why are you eating so slow then?" Benjamin was puzzled because she was usually a fast eater. Arissa twitched her lips and smiled at him before reminding him what he had done to her. "Are you able to eat fast if your lips are in pain?" She had forgotten to lower her voice when she said that. Hence, everyone in the dining room could hear her loud and clear. Kingsley was the first to react as he started laughing. Seeing that, the rest of them couldn't help but laugh as well. "Ha ha ha, Mrs. Graham, please be honest with us. Okay, did Benjamin do that to your lips? Did he bite you?" Kingsley asked. Chapter 659. Arissa immediately blushed when she heard Kingsley's teasing words. At the same time, the kids were all also staring at her curiously. Sensing the attention on her, Arissa's face turned even redder. "Get lost if you can't keep your mouth shut," Benjamin scolded Kingsley. Although Kingsley swiftly zipped his lips, he was still looking at Benjamin suggestively. Benjamin narrowed his eyes and glared at him in response. Seeing that, Kingsley instantly retracted his gaze sheepishly and looked elsewhere. Sean was smiling as well when he swept a glance at Benjamin and Arissa. Right then, Mary uttered in a concerned tone, "Issa, eat slowly, okay? Don't burn yourself." "Okay, I know, Grandaunt." Arissa was less embarrassed when she saw how concerned Mary was about her. The kids were blinking in bewilderment as they stared at Arissa. "Did Daddy really bite Mommy?" Gavin knitted his brows and glared at Benjamin. At the same time, Zachary was also glaring at Benjamin. If Daddy really did that, he has gone over the line. Jack, on the other hand, didn't dare to get curious at all. He just kept his head lowered and ate his dinner. What are you looking at? Eat up, Benjamin uttered in a deep voice when he noticed the angry glares from the kids. The kids snorted in response before getting on with their dinner. Orissa was delighted when she saw the kids do that. Even the kids are angry at Benjamin's shameless act. Benjamin then took a bowl and filled it up with food before placing it in front of Orissa. Eat these. They're not as hot. Orissa glanced at Benjamin and saw him looking calm and collected. Benjamin shot her a look and uttered domineeringly, "What are you looking at me for? Hurry up and eat." At that, the corners of Orissa's mouth twitched. The rest of them merely looked on in amusement, though none of them dared to utter another word. The men, in particular, were aware that Benjamin was going to get angry if they were to speak again. He's really going to chase us out in the middle of dinner. Hence, they all focused on eating as much as they could and kept mum. The kids wisely remained silent as well. However, some of them would sneak a glare at Benjamin from time to time. Orissa's embarrassment faded when she saw everyone eating quietly. Finally, "I can eat in peace." Before she could finish her food, Benjamin would fill her plate up again. In response, she accepted his gesture willingly. "I'll just treat it as him making it up to me. Since he's so attentive, I guess he's feeling remorseful." With those thoughts in her mind, her mood lightened up, and she started eating happily. Benjamin noticed how much she was enjoying dinner. The way her cheeks bulged with food made her look like a squirrel. Her lips were also glistening with oil from the food. His gaze darkened at the sight, and he reached out to wipe her mouth for her affectionately. When his hand came in contact with her lips, Orissa trembled and leaned backward. At that moment, she started blushing once again. She breathed a sigh of relief when she saw no one had noticed it because they were all busy eating. Benjamin's eyes glimmered when he saw how shy and innocent she looked when she blushed. However, Orissa didn't notice the tenderness in his eyes. Unlike Orissa, Edwin saw it, and he was delighted. The relationship between Mr. Graham and Miss York is getting better. An hour later, everyone was done with dinner, but Orissa wasn't. "Take your time, okay, Mrs. Graham. We understand your circumstances. We'll go to the living room for coffee." Kingsley smiled and said. Sean was also smiling when he pushed Mary toward the living room. "Mrs. Graham, I'll bring Madam Mary for a walk, okay? Carry on. Mrs. Graham, enjoy your dinner. I'm going for a walk as well. Mommy, enjoy your dinner. We'll keep great-grandaunt company," the kids uttered before following Kingsley to the living room. "You may leave now. Keep an eye on Gavin and the others." Benjamin turned and ordered Edwin. With a smile on his face, Edwin answered, "Yes, Mr. Graham." Edwin quickly left after that. Mr. Graham wants to spend time alone with Miss York. With that, everyone left Benjamin and Orissa alone in the dining room. She sneaked a peek at Benjamin, but he was looking right back at her. Taken aback, she immediately averted her gaze from him. Chapter 660. Benjamin noticed her action, so he retracted his gaze and ate elegantly. "Is he not done eating?" Orissa peeked at him and saw him still eating. Her initial sense of embarrassment vanished, and she happily continued filling her stomach. Benjamin was done after just a few more bites. When he looked at her, he saw her mouth stuffed with food. Why does she look so cute when she eats? Orissa felt his intense gaze, so she turned around to glance at him. The instant their eyes locked, her heart started pounding frantically. She then calmly broke away from his gaze. After looking away, she could still feel Benjamin staring at her. Inevitably, her heart raced even faster. The atmosphere turned somewhat sensual all of a sudden. The next thing she knew, she was choking on her food, and she ended up coughing. Benjamin got up and patted her back. "Why are you so careless?" He was frowning, clearly worried about her. Orissa coughed for a long while before she regained her composure. By then, her cheeks were flushed due to the coughing. Benjamin poured her a glass of water and gave it to her. "Drink some water." Orissa felt a lot better after a few mouthfuls of water. Benjamin was still staring at her when he noticed her watery eyes. Right then, he changed his mind about scolding her for her carelessness. "Are you feeling better?" Orissa nodded. "Yes, much better. Pay attention when you eat," Benjamin reminded before taking his seat. Orissa merely glanced at him in response. Wasn't that all his fault? His stare was so distracting. When she noticed he was still staring at her, she asked, "Are you done eating?" "Yes." Benjamin picked up his fork and served her more food. "Now, eat up," Orissa answered softly. "If you're done eating, go ahead with your own matters. You don't have to stay here." Benjamin's eyes lit up, and he stared at her devilishly. "Is my presence distracting you? Who in the world wants people to stare at them when they eat?" Orissa was startled momentarily before she answered, "How are you not distracting me when you keep staring at me?" Benjamin's lips curled into a smirk. "If you weren't looking at me, how would you know I was looking at you?" Rendered speechless, she could only shoot him a look of disbelief. Is Benjamin joking with me? She wasn't used to how he had softened up compared to how cold and distant he was last time. Benjamin then flicked her head and lifted her chin. "Eat up. When you're done, I'll apply some medication for you." Orissa was stunned. "What?" Benjamin uttered in a deep voice and stared at her awkwardly. "I can do it by myself," she retorted. However, Benjamin snorted lightly and remained rooted to his seat. Orissa had no choice but to continue eating after seeing that he had no intention of leaving. For the next half an hour, Benjamin kept her company till she was done with dinner. When Orissa got up to clear the table, Benjamin grabbed her hand and dragged her to the living room. "You don't have to clean up," he said. Orissa felt her heart skip a beat when she saw that towering figure of his. "Thank you, Graham." In response, Benjamin merely spared her a glance before turning away. After bringing her to the living room, he sat her down and went to take the first aid kit. He then took out a bottle of disinfectant and ointment from the box. Orissa's heart was fluttering as she watched him dipping a cotton swab into the bottle of disinfectant. After that, Benjamin turned toward her and lifted her chin. "I'll do it myself." Orissa was feeling embarrassed. "Don't move," he demanded before disinfecting her wound gently. With her head tilted back slightly, Orissa was staring right at that handsome face of his. They were so close to each other that she could feel his breath on her face. Needless to say, the atmosphere was rather sensual. Indeed, men are most attractive when they're focused. Besides, he's so elegant and alluring. Orissa started blushing again, and her heart was pounding. Benjamin saw how shy she looked with her eyelashes fluttering slightly, and he was tempted to kiss her pink lips.